Gentlemen, welcome back to the garage. It's been a while since our last episode of Used Motorcycle Rehab, mainly for the reason that we're running out of things to fix. The bike is totally rideable at this point, and mainly what we have left to do are quality of life issues. And the issue we have to address today is a follow-up to our installation of our TrailTech Vapor gauge cluster unit. And you may remember when I installed that I did not install the coolant temperature sensor. I had my reasons for doing that, but mainly it was because it was late at night by the time I got to that stage, and I knew I didn't have to do that day, so I just left it out. Nevertheless, you should have a coolant temperature sensor if you're going to be riding a motorcycle on the road so that you know if you're overheating or not. And today, we're going to rectify that problem by installing this guy. This is the piece that I think I mentioned I was missing at the time I installed the gauge cluster. And what this is a section of pipe with the sensor for the coolant temperature installed in the pipe right here that we install in line with one of our coolant hoses. Now it's tempting to try to use this one on the right side of the bike, which is easy to reach, and you could easily do just cutting a hole in that and plugging this in and calling it a day. However, that's not the best way to do it, and so that's not what we're going to do. Instead, what we're going to do is install this in the hose on the other side of the bike, which is inside the frame. That requires us to remove the seat and lift the tank and possibly even remove the carburetors in order to get access to it. And that's what we're going to do today. Hey guys, sorry for the jump cut, but I'm ashamed to admit I lost a couple of minutes worth of footage. So all you missed out on is draining the engine coolant and removing the seat and raising the tank so we can get access to the carburetors and the airbox and that coolant hose, which are underneath them. And we gotta lift the tank in order to get at those. So that's what you missed. Let's carry on. Okay, here we are on the left side of the bike, and we can see our coolant hose that we want to access right here. Maybe you can't see that, but it runs along the inside of this frame rail to the crotch of the V and connects at the thermostat housing. We need to be able to get to this joint and right in here in order to get it out. So in order to do that, we're going to start by removing just the airbox and see if we can work around the carburetors. But if we have to, we'll remove the carburetors as well. Take a look at that. Your airbox should pull right out. Mine never seems to have been bolted in or anything. It just kind of fits with these two big holes in the bottom. All right, now we've got two hose clamps to undo. We've got one here up at the radiator, and we've got another you can just see right there at the thermostat housing. First, we're gonna do our task at hand here. Loosen up our hose clamp on this front hose, and you can just peel the hose back a little bit here. If you need to, you can use a little flathead screwdriver like this to help loosen the hose and get it to come loose from the barb that it's on, as they kind of get cooked on there. There we go. There. Now we need to figure out how to get the hose to come loose from that thermostat housing. Yeah, we may have to remove the carbs. Hate to have to do that. It's a pain in the neck. But it seems like this would go a lot faster if we did. And for this, first thing we need to do is disconnect any rogue hoses. This one goes to the fuel petcock because the Suzuki has this trick vacuum-operated fuel petcock. I said cock. The next thing we need to do is loosen these carb boots. On this side, the screw for this carb boot is very easy to reach right in here. So we just go back in here with our JIS screwdriver and we loosen it. You're going to want to get it pretty loose, but you don't want to remove it completely because then sad life happens. So there we've got one. All right, back on the left side of the bike, the front carb boot screw can be accessed through here with a comically long crosshead Phillips-esque screwdriver. This one is actually Phillips because I don't have a JIS one this long. And our next order of business then is to undo the cables from the carbs and undo the fuel line so that we can actually get the carburetors out. There are two carburetor cables. There's one that pulls when you open the throttle, and there's another that pushes when you open the throttle and pulls when you close it. You gotta undo both of these, loosen the nuts enough that you can liberate the cable from the little perch. So you can see we've got one of them loose here. We've got this other one we also have to loosen. It's being a little bit of a pain. You gotta be a little bit of a pain. We also have this nut thing up at the top here we can use to loosen the bottom one. And there we go. Now we've got our cables loosened. Now our last thing holding this in, I assume, the choke cable may be actually the last thing holding it in. How do we release the choke cable? Alright guys, sorry for the jump cut, but the camera battery died and something came up and now it's the next day. When we left off, we had just about gotten our carburetors disconnected from the bike so we can remove them, get them out of the way, and access our thermostat housing. The last thing we need to disconnect is this cable here for the cold start enrichment plunger, also called the choke. So we're going to start by doing that. Our choke cable is held in these big meaty, these are probably JIS. They look like Phillips. Whatever, they're crosshead type screws. I don't have a JIS screwdriver this big. So we're going to go ahead and remove these. Pull that out. We pull our cold start enrichment plunger out. We're going to put our screw back in here so it doesn't get lost. All right, we're going to need a screwdriver or something to help persuade that. Sometimes these connectors with the locking tabs can be a little finicky. So we'll grab us a little screwdriver here and press it in there. Use that to help us release our connector. See how we've got the tab out of the way now, and it comes out easily. On the other side, we undo the choke cable on this side. This one is quite a bit harder to reach. There. There's our screw out. We can pull our... As you pull these up and away, you're going to need to liberate the throttle cables from them, which is on this side. There's also a hose. Come on out of there. Once you get that undone, you're going to find that it still doesn't come out. In order to get it out, you also have to undo the ends of the throttle cables from their bell crank. Oh, one more thing. Right here, we have a bolt that holds the perch for the idle speed adjustment screw. We're going to need to remove that so we can fish the idle speed cable out through that side in order to get this out of there. I think maybe our answer is a socket and some various extensions. So we'll try a 3-inch extension first and see how that gets us. That looks like it's gonna work. Yeah. Okay, there we go. This makes me wonder, why is this screw so big? Okay, so there's our screw. And here's our idle speed cable loose under there. Now we have quite a bit more play to raise the carburetors up. Okay, once you get that undone, we can lift our carburetors out of here. You're going to need to fish this carburetor drain hose out of here as well. And as well, the idle speed adjustment screw there has that little bracket on it. You got to fish that out too. So now we've got this out and we can set it aside and get on with our main task, which is access to this thermostat housing. Now that we have the carbs out, we have all sorts of room to get at our coolant hoses and our thermostat housing, along with our big coolant hose over here, which we originally needed access to install the sensor. First, we're going to stuff the paper towel in the throats for the cylinders so we don't accidentally drop anything down in there. Maybe the best way to go about getting this this out of here is to remove it all as one piece. We'll start with these hose clamps here. And then there's some right here we'll also loosen. Let's see what size these are. That's a 6. So we got our 6mm socket. Be careful not to loosen it so much that it comes apart. We do this side. Now, we need to loosen these hose clamps. And for those, it looks like the way you access them is from outside the frame, like this. Now we've got the 2 hose clamps for this hose off of their spots. Yes. So this bottom one, you kind of go in through the side above the cylinder, below the frame. There we go. So we got our hose clamps off. We also need to disconnect our wire for our coolant temp switch. And also, there we go. We've got this ground wire that we'll pull out of the way. If I knew for sure that I wasn't going to need to reuse these hoses, the easy answer to this would be to cut them. Unfortunately, I don't know for sure that I'm not going to have to reuse them. So, out of an abundance of caution, I'm not going to attempt to cut them. Even though that would be super easy and convenient as a way of getting them out. There we go. Okay. Now that we've got one of those off of there, this should get quite a bit easier, since we've got a lot more room to move. We're going to get these hose clamps out of the way. So there we go. I think we've got it broken loose from our hose here. Maybe we can pull the... Oh, okay. We've got one more hose there, like I said, on the bottom of it. Those of you who have worked on cars quite a bit will no doubt notice some interesting trends in motorcycle design versus car design. For instance, how difficult some components are to reach in a motorcycle versus a car, and vice versa. It seems like in some ways they're opposites. Thermostats are usually pretty easy to reach in cars, typically right in the front where you can get at it. But on motorcycles, they're inevitably very difficult. Okay, there we go. Let's try it now. Can we? With our hose clamp out of the way, it seems like it should be an easy operation to liberate this. There we go. Okay. And there's our price. Before we get too much further, let's talk for a second about what exactly we're doing and why we went to all this trouble as opposed to cutting that right-hand coolant hose. Now, you can imagine the engine cylinders are right here. So the coolant comes out of the cylinder heads, through these hoses, and into our thermostat housing here, where the thermostat is located right here. Now, when the engine is cold, the thermostat is closed, and the hot coolant comes out into here, and then just stops. There's a tiny hole in the thermostat, and a little bit of it makes its way through, but hardly any. So we have hot coolant here and cold coolant here. Once the thermostat opens, we have coolant coming out of the engine hot, flowing past the thermostat and into this hose, where it flows through the hose and over to the radiator over here. So, once the thermostat opens and the engine is up to temperature, the coolant in this area is the hottest that it gets, as opposed to the coolant in that other hose, which returns from the radiator. That's the coolant at its coldest point. And we want to measure at the hottest point. So the factory has a convenient little spot right there to measure the coolant temperature. We, unfortunately, I believe, still need this, so we can't simply remove this and install our own sensor there. And so we have to do the next best thing, and that is we're going to cut this hose right here and install our sensor section so that while we can't measure the coolant temperature as it's coming out of the engine, we can at least measure the temperature of the coolant that's making its way to the radiator. To install our coolant temperature sensor, we need it in a straight section, so we can't put it right here. We've got to put it about right here. Maybe we want this piece facing up like this. So, we need to cut our hose right here. And you may notice that this hose is actually too. It has this sheath over it to keep it from chafing on stuff inside the frame. So we're gonna have to cut through that as well. Hose clamp here, put it over the end. Get our new hose clamps for our sensor, put them, let's see here. You know what we're gonna do? This needs to go this way. I'm gonna say this needs to go this way. We get our sensor, stick it in there like that. Get our sheath, slip it over our hose like this. And there we go. We've got our exposed section for our clamp. I'm going to put our clamp on, say like that. No, hang on. This goes this way. So we get our clamp on the screw like this. That up. We want our screw up on this one so we can access it from the top. And we put these two guys together. Now we can tighten our clamps down. Something I've noticed on these hoses in particular is that you got to get these clamps surprisingly tight. You're going to get them tight enough, or as tight as you think is tight enough, and that's not going to be tight enough, and they're going to leak. So you're going to have to go back in and tighten them. So when you put these on, make sure they're good and tight. There we go. Like that. And then we do the sky like this. All right. So now our enhanced coolant hose assembly is ready to go back on the bike. As a note, you might want to replace these little hoses. If you live in a climate that's harsher than mine, these may be dried out and cracked. But I live in Texas where coolant hoses last basically forever, and these seem perfectly fine. They're more or less as pliable as one might expect a new one to be. So I'm not going to replace these. Okay guys, we're back at the bike and we need to start reassembling everything basically in the opposite order of how we took it apart. We're going to start with our new coolant hose. And so we'll fish this guy with this big stiff section in the middle of it now. It's going to be harder to fish in here. Okay, there we go. Grab one of our hose clamps, put it over the end of our coolant hose here, and I'm going to go ahead and stick this over the barb on the radiator up at the front. Okay. Make sure you get the spark plug wire right here, not looped around it. Okay. Maybe the best way to do this is to put the coolant hoses. So this has this little ridge on it right here, and your hose will probably have a divot in it from having rested against that ridge. So we put it on there like this. Now, we're going to take our hose clamps and make sure that you get the drive screw oriented correctly. I'm going to put both hose clamps on the barb. There we go. Okay, so you want one with the screw on the bottom pointing towards you as you sit on the left side of the bike. We're going to do the same thing on the other side like this. Push that out of the way. Yep, one more thing. This hose clamp we'll go ahead and put over the end of our thermostat housing so it's on there. Started like this. So we go ahead and slip this guy over there now. There. All right. There we go. We've got both ends of this hose on their barbs. We've got both ends of this hose on the barbs. We've got our radiator hose on its barb on our thermostat housing. We need to reorient our coolant sensor, or our hose clamp, sorry. Wiggle everything into place. Now, you may remember what a pain in the neck this was. Get off of that barb. Going on, it just slides right on there. There's a right tool for every job. I wonder if maybe this is it. There. All right, with that little hose clamp on the bottom, now we can get on with tightening down all of our hose clamps up here. Tighten and loosen. Now, we're ready to reassemble. Main thing being the carburetors. Oh yeah, and we said we were going to use zip ties to hold this anti-chafe thing in place. So we'll go ahead and get those. We'll trim the tails off the ends of these later. We grab our rack of carburetors, and we only pull our paper towels out at the last minute. Okay. One thing I'm going to do, because it seems like it's supposed to be routed this way, is I'm going to take this choke cable, which previously had been routed haphazardly kind of over here. I'm going to route it under here. Have it come up here on this side, like that. And that seems much more like how that's supposed to work. Doesn't that seem better? I think that seems better. Now, we're ready to get our rack of carburetors and fish them back in here. Boing. So you want to make sure you route your idle speed thing down in there like that. Get your this hose. And that goes down there. We pull our paper towel out of here. Route your idle speed adjuster kind of back over where it goes on the left side of the bike. So now, I think the next thing we need to do is our choke cables. There's one kind of up here, and there's another over here. Your choke cable consists of this plunger, this rubber boot, and this retaining plate. So we stick the plunger in the little hole in the side of the carb. Put that in there. We get our screw. We stick the screw in the hole. We take our Phillips screwdriver and we use it to tighten down the screw. Holds in our choke cable like that. And now we need to do the one on this side. That one's a little trickier because you got to pull the carbs up to be able to get at it. Before we can seat the carbs down in their homes, we need to get the throttle cables hooked up to the bell crank. And there's, so kind of rotate the cable down. There, okay. So we've got our cables in their little homes down here in the bell crank. Make sure they go in all the way. And we'll wait until we get the carbs all the way seated in their boots and tightened down before we worry about these cables fitting into their perch. Now we are ready to seat the carbs in the boots. So you get the mouth of them at the bottom, lined up with the boot. Push down firmly on the front. Unwiggle the rear end. Once again, we'll use our long screwdriver. We go in from the side here. I can just get my finger on the clamp, hold it. You can get a better look at what I'm doing here with this rear one. So you come in from the side, use your long Phillips screwdriver to tighten these down. The last thing we need to hook up is our throttle cables. There we go. We got that one in its little home. We get this guy in its little home up here. There we go. Okay. You want to make sure that you get both cables into their channels in the bell crank, or otherwise your throttle will bind. And that'll be a sad time. Then you can use this smaller nut section to tighten the cable down. Oops. Pull the nut up against the bell crank. Start tightening it down. Just like that. And there we go. Check your throttle for smooth operation. All right, so now we can put our airbox back in. There we go. Okay. Then make sure that all of your hoses that connect to it, there's 2 on the left side, hook back up to it. Now, we have this wire for our coolant temperature sensor just hanging out through the frame. So I'm going to route it up through like this. I'm going to route it up through the triples, along with my various other wiring for the gauge. Like that. And it connects to one of these connectors up here. The Trail Tech gauge is such that you can't hook the sensors up wrong. They only go one way. So you have some slack up here that you probably want to give some slack in the steering so that that cable can move around. We'll neaten that up later once we're sure we don't have to take everything apart again. We need to make sure our drain plug here is tight. Like that. Don't have to kill it. With our drain plug in, we're ready to fill the engine back up with coolant. So you go ahead and you pour your coolant in there. And it should take roughly the same volume that came out. We continue filling until the radiator is full. As you fill, you may need to find that squeezing the radiator hoses like this helps burp some of the air out. You want to make sure that your coolant level is up in the top of this filler neck. And the next thing we're going to do is start the engine and let it warm up to temperature. So we're going to go ahead and set the choke, pull the clutch, start the engine. And notice we now have a coolant temperature indication. It's about 80 degrees here in the garage. So 84 is the same value. Wait, oh, that's the air temperature. Hang on. There we go. Now we have a coolant temperature indication. We also want to watch the level of the coolant in our fill neck. This should drop a little bit once the engine starts to warm up because it's very difficult to get all the air bubbles out without running the engine. I've shut the engine off so you can hear it. Now the cooling fan is running. It looks like it switches on at about 210, but the calibration of the sensor may be a little different than ours. So you can see the temperature at the sensor is starting to drop because we don't have the engine heating. So I'm going to go ahead and start the engine back up. Take my word for it. But our engine is running, our coolant temperature is 220, and the fan is running as well. So it looks like our coolant temperature, our fan kicks on at 220. It shouldn't be a problem as long as we're moving, but if we were stopped in traffic, that would save us from overheating. Once you're satisfied that the fan runs, the bike doesn't overheat out of control, you don't have any leaks, go ahead and shut the engine down, let it cool off before we finish putting everything back together. We also want to make sure that we fasten down our new sensor wire. So I've got some other cables that pass through here, so I'm going to go ahead and put a zip tie around this whole bundle. I'm going to use another zip tie up here, and you can mock my green zip ties all you want, but I like them. They look like I work on this. There. There. All right, guys, there you have it. We got our sensor installed, we refilled the coolant, we checked for function. Obviously, you should do this as part of the TrailTech Vapor install. I'm doing it months later because I knew I could get away with it, but frankly, you should do this with the Vapor install, and if that means it's going to take multiple days, then let it take multiple days and do this correctly. Nevertheless, I think we were successful here, and though I haven't test ridden the bike, we heated it up good and plenty here in the garage, and everything works fine. So we're calling this a win. If you're trying to do this job on your bike with the TrailTech Vapor, I hope this helped you out, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.